Hi guys, welcome back to the Facebook Addiction Topic Show. Today we have Dr. Preet Jonasia.
Hi.
And Joselle Babera, and this is the clinical director at the Lighthouse Treatment Center and the alumni coordinator.
Hi, thanks for having us. Thanks for having me.
And today we're going to be talking about...
Well, today we're going to look at drug use as an adaptive response to emotional distress and how the adaptive response then in time and in progression in the addiction process turns into maladaptive response and maladaptive functioning. And so if we look at the grand scheme of things like behavior is very functional. Mm-hmm. There's a goal-directed outcome. So we perceive our behavior to elicit then a response or a result. So we're looking for that. Adaptive behaviors are behaviors that have the function of increasing our level of impairment or adaptation to the environment. So what happens is we do certain things in order to normalize and function in everyday society, like go to school, go to work, do different things, engage with people. And so by definition, adaptive behavior is behavior that enables an individual to function, again, to increase a level of impairment. I'm sorry, I apologize. Not increase, decrease level of impairment, increase a sense of adaptation and homeostasis in the environment. If you look through what homeostasis looks like, homeostasis is basically our body's response to keeping things stable. It's the internal environment. And a simple example of that would be the thermostat. You'll read this in every psych book. They use the thermostat as an example for homeostasis, which again it's a mechanism to stabilize any fluctuations, like kind of what we just noticed right now is really warm in the room, and now the mechanism has turned on, and now it's going to cool it down in order to bring about the desired temperature that we want, such as 72 degrees or 68 degrees, whatever it is. I'm sure right now we probably want it to be a little bit lower.
Yeah, it's quite warm in here. Does this have anything to do with emotional regulation?
It does, actually, because we have innate behaviors, which are genetic or learned responses to survive. And then we have learned behaviors that through socialization we utilize to adapt again to our environment. So something like innate would be our body's ability, like when you're working out or sitting in the sauna, what does the body do?
Warms up.
It warms up, but then what happens after we warm up?
Cools
down by perspiration. We sweat, and so that's our body's internal mechanism to bring about a temperature that's not probably too toxic for us, right? So that's kind of what happens. So again, that's kind of a very textbook description of that. But what about more behaviors that may be innate and learned? So let's say you're sad and you're depressed. What is something that comes to mind that we do when we're sad and depressed? That's just it comes natural for some people. Some people may unlearn that behavior, but
I would say cry.
Yeah, perfect. Crying, and usually crying, what it does is it releases endorphins. Okay, to alleviate all the pain or the discomfort we're experiencing. So we again have these innate abilities, and then we have these learned abilities. Learned abilities can look like positive coping skills that we learn, through, again, our parents. If our parents were stressed and they went for a walk, we're more likely to go for a walk. But what happens in that process is, because we want to adapt to our environment and meet our needs, we will we'll cope or use mechanisms that are going to bring back, again, to the homeostatic state, because if we don't do that, we're going to feel disoriented. And that's the disorientation people feel when they're stressed. So do you want me to explain?
Yeah.
Tell me,
elaborate.
Tell me where you're at.
Examples would be great,
Okay. So emotional disorientation is a sense of confusion. It's a subjective feeling that is different from what's going on the outside. So I was working with a client, and he had gone through some severe sexual abuse, but it was by a loved one. And what ended up happening is internally he knew that it was not okay. But on the outside, he experienced, because it was a loved one, that is this okay? Is this normal? And especially the perpetrators, usually what they do is they say it's okay. This is supposed to be happening.
Yeah.
This is a part of love or whatever, care. And so he had this constant feeling of disorientation because, again, something on the inside felt very confused, right?
Yeah.
It was wrong. It was wrong, and he knew it. But on the outside, he's having to now pretend everything's okay.
Yeah.
Again, causing that sense of disorientation. So what happens in substance abuse, or at this point, use?
About to ask that.
Yeah. Okay, great. And substance use is there's an adaptive quality. Although it's very unhealthy, it's still adaptive. And what I mean by that, we want to function. We want to adapt to our environment. We want to be able to go to school and go to work and engage in relationships. So we start to use these substances or other behaviors in order to, again, bring about homeostasis and reduce the disorientation of whatever stress that you're experiencing at the time. And how that starts to become maladaptive, because you have this adaptive quality, then what ends up happening? We have all these people in treatment coming in, but that same behavior isn't working for them. And why isn't it working? Because it has progressed. The decision of making a choice to use is now a compulsion to use. And that's what makes it maladaptive. Now you're in a situation where the choice is gone from you. And what that does is it becomes maladaptive. And the definition of maladaptive behavior is something that impairs our functioning. So adaptive increases or adaptation to the environment, and then maladaptive means it's impairing, it's creating even more deficit. And a huge component of the deficit is the idea of learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is a self-defeated attitude where no matter what you do, you think pain and failure is inevitable. And I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Are we okay?
Yeah, what about people who are compulsively using substances? Like, what are some ways for them to reduce that, or what causes it?
Well, what causes is, again, that the idea of learned helplessness. You're using these avoidant behaviors, and you're no longer searching for adaptive methods, because at the point of use, it's still there's a willingness there, and there's motivation to find other things. But at the point of when it becomes an addiction, you no longer are searching, and we call that renunciation of search activity. And what that is again surrendering to the self-reinforcing learned helplessness behavior, where no matter what I do, there's no change. And I have actually a really good example. I was working with a client at our facility, and he was diagnosed with ADHD. So already there was kind of a deficit in emotional regulation and other things, and was probably experiencing some amount of performance anxiety in school. When he came to us, he was about, I would say, like 19, and but going back, he was not really functioning very well. So he was introduced to, of course, at his age around 14, 15, smoking pot and maybe drinking here and there. And at that point, he would use it to, just kind of relax, or before a test or after a test for a reward. But again, it wasn't compulsive use. And at that point, it would normalize his behavior and his functioning, so he can go to school, he can fulfill his expectations of, in the community, can be part of his family. But then what happens when somebody has that type of behavior going on? Even though it's adaptive, what happens? How do we go from adaptive to maladaptive? Well, he gets in a car accident.
Oh no.
And it's a violent car accident. And now he's experiencing opiates. Well, trauma. Trauma gets added. Yeah. And so when trauma gets added to that, the fear of death was very present, and one of his friends actually died on the spot. The driver died on the spot.
Oh, yeah.
And he comes back, and now fast forward to age 19, what is he having? He's reliving the trauma.
Right.
He's experiencing intrusive thoughts. He's having difficulty concentrating even more, but he doesn't have the skill set because he was using, you know, even though it was kind of functional at the point, now it's becoming dysfunctional.
Because he's using it to cope.
He's using it to cope.
On a daily basis with his feelings and the trauma.
Eventually he starts to do that.
So
because
he knows any of that.
I'm sorry?
What takes that away, or what are some healthy ways that he could have prevented that?
Well, if going back in time, if he had learned some skills, because at that point his parents did not probably have the adequate parenting skills to deal with his ADHD. He was really dysregulated. He did not know how to cope even just with that pre-existing condition. And now he has this whole other condition. And now what? Now he's using compulsively. And now the drug use is becoming an addiction, and now because it's an addiction, it's getting him stuck in a cycle of learned helplessness. This is causing more deficit. So now he's no longer able to go to school. He's no longer able to function in society. He has legal issues. Yeah, he has legal issues. He has all these issues, and not only that, with addiction, as we know, it causes further deficit. Yeah. So what happens is now he's put himself in other car accidents, reinforcing the original event, because he's now driving under the influence. So basically, it just went from adaptive to completely maladaptive functioning. And I worked with him, and we actually ended up doing EMDR for his trauma, and he was able to kind of start looking at other ways of adaptive functioning, within treatment, of course, so that's the part. And then I guess he was off, and hopefully I think he's still sober, and he's so maintaining,
cool.
With treatment.
I know who you're talking about when he's doing it.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you feel like, in your own personal opinion, from his initial car accident, if he was to get counseling from that or therapy, that his behavior wouldn't have turned into maladaptive behavior?
I think yes, and I also think to go back and to deal with his pre-existing condition, because his parents at all did not understand what it is. They just thought it was bad behavior. Why is his mom was constantly picking on him for fidgeting. Well, that's a symptom of ADHD. Maybe medication would have helped, but maybe also having that knowledge of what he's actually going through would have not created an addiction vulnerability, basically.
So pretty much with his diagnosis, or maybe it wasn't diagnosed at the time, he was maybe subconsciously self-medicating? Okay.
Yeah. So again, maladaptive behaviors, it's all those avoidant behaviors. The whole point is to relieve yourself of discomfort. But what ends up happening when you use maladaptive behaviors is that it creates further deficit, and it creates more disorientation, because you're stuck in this vicious cycle. So I have actually a really good example. Again, going back to the client I had that had gone through sexual abuse. He had over time developed I said drug abuse, but the one that had been molested at an early age. What happened with him is he developed sexual addiction, and his drug addiction was actually secondary, but they were reinforcing each other, and it was actually driving his sexual addiction.
Wow!
And so you have to look at that, and that kind of brings us to kind of our last point is, okay, we have all these issues. You're disoriented. You feel defeated. Well, how do you overcome all that? What do you do? I mean, are you stuck forever? Obviously not, right? We have plenty of people coming into treatment and are successful at recovery. And so I like to kind of focus on what that looks like in terms of treatment. Treatment, of course, needs to be comprehensive, right? And probably best idea or best platform for recovery would be to be part of a treatment facility or admit yourself, so you can be insulated and emotionally supported, I would say. And then you can begin the action part of behavior, the program, which would be individual counseling sessions, therapy sessions, groups, and just kind of and affiliating yourself maybe with a 12-step or any type of other support network. But that's kind of the parameter that we would use. But within that parameter, how do you have a cognitive and emotional change in orientation? Because that's what needs to take place for long-term sobriety.
Right.
Because we have plenty of people that come through the door, right? They come in, and then they leave, and then they relapse, right, in the field. And then they come back again until they have that cycle again, right? A self-defeated cycle. And now, what's the difference? Where should the difference lie? Well, it needs to lie in that thinking and that behaving. So how do you overcome maladaptive thinking, functioning, and behaviors? Well, the first step is going to be, which is absolutely necessary, is to identify those behaviors. What do they look like? What are they? And not just the drug use, but all the behaviors that surround the drug use, like
lying, cheating, stealing.
Also pre-existing conditions, like we mentioned with the child with the car accident, or behaviors that even support it, like the sexual compulsions and other compulsions that go along with it. In order, it is so necessary to identify those behaviors. Even in treatment, I see when people come in, they're abstaining from their drug of choice, but what behaviors do we see arise in when they're in treatment? They're completely off their substance of, abuse.
Anger,
we see
frustration,
anger, even an elevation in depression, or we'll see things like nail biting, purging, self-injurious behavior, even drinking more coffee or snacking more, things. So we have to be able to identify what those are along with the drug use. The second thing would be, what is the purpose of that behavior? Why do you do what you do? It's functional, right?
Yeah.
But now it's no longer giving you the ability to function.
Right.
So why do you keep doing this behavior? What is the pathology underneath all that? What does that mean? What does your behavior mean to you? And a good way to look at it is through understanding the different components of behavior. So the first component is just behavior, the acting part of the behavior. The second component would be the thinking part of the behavior. Then we have the affective, we call it, or feeling part of the behavior, and then the somatic or the physiology. So there's 4 components just by looking at one behavior. So let's take an example. You have a horrible day at work. Okay. Horrible day. People were just obnoxious and stressed you out, and now you come home and what? You want to decompress.
Wind down.
You want to wind down, right? Okay, so let's say you say, I'm going to have a glass of wine. So that's the action part of the behavior.
Right.
Actually, the drinking of it. What are the thoughts that go with it? Well, if I drink this, I'm gonna think that I'm calmer. I deserve to have this drink because it's going to relax me.
Start rationalizing.
Yes. Now, what's the feeling? I'm feeling less stressed. Right? I'm okay.
I am feeling calmer.
Yeah, I'm feeling calmer. And then you have the somatic, where your shoulders are not as tense, your heart rate is kind of gone down. And so you have this behavior, so you have to look at each aspect of it in order to even see what you're doing. Because all of that is part of it. All those 4 components are part of just that one behavior of taking a glass of, drinking a glass of wine or using or whatever you're planning on doing. And then the third step would be to look at the costs and benefits. what is the benefit of me drinking a glass of wine? What am I gaining out of it? Well, it allows relaxation, right? And it's probably quicker than going for a walk. So, but it's going to cost me what in the long run? It's going to your sobriety. It's going to cost you a renunciation again. That word is a
vicious cycle.
Vicious cycle. Renunciation that I no longer am going to look for other adaptive skills, which impacts our motivation, actually.
Right.
Because when we no longer think we can and no longer think we can master the environment or have our task complete, we feel a lack of motivation and a lack of self-efficacy, which affects
self-esteem.
Yes, and that all goes back to your esteem then.
Yeah.
But let's say you decided, instead of a drink, I'm gonna go for a walk. What's going to happen then? Same benefits, maybe will take longer. So you want to look at that. But what is it going to cost me? Well, I wanted to make some dinner. Now that's going to delay that process, and maybe I have to put the kids to bed, and maybe I have to do this. But in the long run, what is it going to do for me?
Hinder.
Or
not help you grow?
Well, the going for the walk would actually help
that
you.
would benefit
right?
you. I'm sorry.
That would, yes, the drinking, absolutely. The drinking would hinder, but the walk might actually benefit me because I'm going to go outside,
healthy,
and it's going to change my thinking. Number one, because I'm going to start looking at things around me. The bilateral stimulation that happens with walking, right, accessing both sides of the brain, is going to calm me down. Physically, I'm gonna feel better. I'm gonna feel like, hey, I did this. This is great. Maybe the thinking was maybe the day wasn't that bad, and now I'm thinking again about other things. So,
slight accomplishment.
So looking at again the costs and benefits of the behavior are really important. And then the step after that would say is examining the emotional pull, the investment. What is the investment in the drug use? Why do you continue versus going for a walk or going and talking or going and being part of a group or going and socializing and doing something fun? Why am I choosing this? I know the purpose maybe, but why is the investment here so much?
What are some examples of those?
Well, that you have to look at your vulnerabilities. Where are the deficits? Where have you not picked up along the way better skills? Okay, so that's going to have to go back in time and look at where are the deficits and where do I need to fulfill those deficits? Because the more skills I have, the less invested I am in this behavior, right? Because I have options now. This one feels like I have no options. This one, I have options.
Interesting.
And the last thing is, kind of substituting and learning new adaptive skills and functioning, because that again is going to allow you to live a more fruitful and joyful life. And quite honestly, I do think that is probably best done with the foundation of a good program, because the program again is going to give you the opportunity to have those successes where you think I am self-efficacious, meaning I can complete a task and I am good at this, and have that opportunity and support and now I don't have learned helplessness. I don't have that feeling where no matter what I do I'm gonna fail, because you have the opportunity to succeed. So that's kind of in a nutshell, I would say, how drug use, again, it's just one perspective. It's not a comprehensive theory to this complex disease that we're dealing with. So,
well, thank you so much for coming out with us.
Thank you.
I've learned so much. I hope you guys did too, and we'll see you next week.